It's just past 5 p.m. across India. Live from New Delhi, you're watching DD India Global. We'll get you top stories from India and the region. I'm Tanvi Taneja. And for news from the rest of the world, I'm joined by my colleague in London, Ollie Barrett. Ollie, what are the big stories you have for us?
Well, Tanvi, it's just gone 11:30 a.m. here in London, 12:30 p.m. across Central Europe. And coming up in the next 30 minutes, we will go live to Israel. We'll get the latest on that unrest in Haiti and perhaps some cost of living relief for UK households. First, the headlines.
India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi discusses the Ukraine crisis with Russia's President Vladimir Putin over phone. Both leaders also review progress in bilateral cooperation. US Defense Secretary Llyod Austin warns that Ukraine's survival was in danger, seeks allies' support at the monthly meeting of the Ukraine Defense Contact Group at the Ramstein Air Base in Germany. Israeli military kills 90 gunmen and arrests 160 others in a raid at Gaza's Shifa hospital. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken returns to the Middle East for the 6th time to secure a ceasefire deal. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Russian President Vladimir Putin held a telephonic conversation on Wednesday. Prime Minister Modi congratulated Putin on his re-election as the President of Russia. The two leaders agreed to make concerted efforts towards further strengthening the special and privileged strategic partnership between the two countries in the years to come. Both the leaders also reviewed progress in various issues of bilateral cooperation and exchanged views on regional and global issues of mutual interest. While discussing the Russia-Ukraine conflict, Prime Minister Narendra Modi reiterated India's consistent position in favor of dialogue and diplomacy as the way forward. The two leaders agreed to remain in touch. DD India's Meghna Dev joins us for more on this story now. Meghna, the leaders have discussed the conflict over phone. What more can you tell us on the way forward that has been discussed?
Well, Prime Minister Narendra Modi obviously held a telephonic conversation with Russian President Putin, and he did obviously congratulate him on his landslide election victory. Prime Minister Narendra Modi also did post on X on 18th of March congratulating President Putin about his victory and obviously taking forward the special and privileged strategic partnership that both the countries have. Besides that, also Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and in all, if you look at India, has been very consistent with the stand on the Russia and Ukraine conflict. That is, dialogue and diplomacy are the only way forward. And Prime Minister Narendra Modi did reiterate it, during this conversation as well. And this also speaks volumes of how firm India has been on its stand to resolve the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Besides that, also the conversation did encapsulate how to move forward in terms of bilateral cooperation. Russian President Vladimir Putin did also, congratulate Prime Minister Narendra Modi and did wish him, for a successful conduction of the elections in India. We do see that earlier, Prime Minister Narendra Modi had also spoken to the Russian president in January. Russia is the presidency for the BRICS. Prime Minister Narendra Modi did also speak to the Russian president last time, about regional issues as well, and obviously the presidency of the BRICS. But very importantly, when we talk about bilateral cooperation, we must remember the External Affairs Minister, Dr. S. Jaishankar's visit to Russia in December, which was, very important in terms of enhancing bilateral cooperation, because we know that India and Russia also have, a structure of an annual summit for which in 2021 the Russian president was in New Delhi, but we haven't seen, any such visit happening after that. But besides, having said that, the annual summit for the BRICS is something that people are looking forward to. Besides, obviously, when we saw that the External Affairs Minister was in Russia in December 2023, President, and he called on President Putin. President Putin did say that he did invite Prime Minister Narendra Modi to visit Russia. Besides that, also when we see that there are some projects which are extremely important in the pipeline, when we talk about the Kundakulam nuclear power project, we also talk about an MOU which was signed in the sector of pharmaceuticals. And obviously, when we see that defense is one sector which have, where Russia and India have been, time-tested partners. In that sector as well, there has been talks about collaboration in joint manufacturing of modern weaponry and equipment for defense. So this is something, encapsulating the relationship and obviously the trade, which is doing really well. We have more than $50 billion US of trade as well.
Yes,
so
Meghna, we'll have to
encapsulating
leave
all
it
of that
here.
and we're moving forward.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Meghna, for those updates. Now, coming back to the conflict, air raid sirens blare almost daily in the southern Russian city of Belgorod, prompting residents to seek shelter. Belgorod, situated just 40 kilometers north of the border, stands out as a notable exception, underscoring that not every civilian can be shielded from the repercussions of the conflict. Russia has been evacuating children from a border region because of continuous Ukrainian shelling. The children are being moved from the Belgorod region farther east, away from the Ukraine border. Meanwhile, Russian President Vladimir Putin vowed a strong response to the recent shelling of Russia's Belgorod region.
The primary task is to ensure security. There are different ways. They are not easy, but we will do it. I have already spoken about it. I do not want to go into details in this festive surroundings, but we will continue working on it. We can respond with the exact same things, civilian infrastructures and all the similar targets that the enemy is striking.
One person has died and 2 were injured as a result of Ukrainian shelling in Russia's Belgorod region on Wednesday. Russia is evacuating some 9,000 children from the region which borders Ukraine. Local governor Vyacheslav Gladkov said that the relocation will start this Thursday as Ukrainian attacks have intensified. DD India's Dasha Chandishova has more from Moscow.
First 1,200 children will be relocated from Belgorod region on Thursday, following the intensification of the Ukrainian attacks against Russia's border region. According to the local governor Vyacheslav Gladkov, the children will be moved to Penza, Tambov and Kaluga regions that are deeper in the Russian territory. He also said that at the moment, the total of 9,000 children have requested to be relocated from the region and that all requests will be accommodated soon. He said that the region has been relocating children for 2 years already. He also urged those who haven't left the territories located closest to the border with Ukraine to think about temporary relocation. On Wednesday, Russian President Vladimir Putin thanked Belgorod residents for their courage and promised to support them. He said the key was to ensure safety and promised Russia would respond to the Ukrainian attacks. Earlier this week, he said that a buffer zone will need to be created on the border with Ukraine to protect civilians against long-range strikes and cross-border raids. Authorities have introduced checkpoints in several border areas to ensure safety of the civilians. Dasha Chernashova in Moscow, reporting for DD India.
U.S. Defense Chief Llyod Austin has promised continued military support to Ukraine and said that the allies will step up the delivery of urgently needed weapons and ammunition. White House is finding ways to send assistance to Kiev as Republican House of Representatives Speaker Mike Johnson has refused to call a vote on a bill that would provide $60 billion more for Ukraine. Austin is leading the monthly meeting of the Ukraine Defense Contact Group, where around 50 defense ministers and senior officials are attending. In recent weeks, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has appealed to the Western allies for more support.
So when we invest in Ukraine's security, we invest in our own security. And we strengthen this contact group's shared vision of an open world of rules and rights and responsibilities. Today, Ukraine's survival is in danger, and America's security is at risk. And they don't have a day to waste, and we don't have a day to spare either.
For more on this story, we are now joined by DW's Thomas Sparrow from Berlin. Thomas, thank you for being with us. What more can you tell us about the specifics of Ukraine Defense Contact Group of 2024? How will it operate?
Well, this contact group is particularly important to coordinate efforts by those countries that are interested in helping Ukraine, and the understanding more and more among those countries that are helping Ukraine is that that assistance, military assistance, political assistance, economic assistance, needs to be long-term. In other words, the understanding is that there is no realistic expectation that the war in Ukraine would end very shortly, would end very soon. So the efforts need to be coordinated at an international level to help Ukraine defend itself from Russia. And that defense in particular now is focused on both ammunition and also air defense, two key topics that are being discussed at this meeting. And in particular on the issue of ammunition, there are also international efforts to provide Ukraine with the necessary ammunition that it needs. This is something that has been a very big problem for Ukrainian forces in recent times, and that's why with this international coordination during this contact group, one of the key areas of discussion was precisely how to give Ukraine, how to provide Ukraine with the necessary ammunition that it needs to defend itself.
Thomas, do you foresee a longer-term situation where US aid falls short and European support for Ukraine is insufficient to stave off Russian forces? What happens then?
There are questions, obviously, about the long-term commitment when it comes to this international support to Ukraine, and a long-term commitment in particular considering the fact that, for example, this year the United States will have its elections, that there's a possibility that there will be certain changes in the political priorities there. And as such, this is something that is being discussed at an international level in high-ranking discussions to make sure that irrespective of what changes happen, for example, at the US level, that Ukraine still manages to get the help that it needs to defend itself from Russia when it comes, for example, to ammunition, when it comes, for example, to air defense, but not only in those two specific cases. So certainly these are issues that are being discussed, but they're also being discussed under the idea that it's still very early to actually make a specific decision. No one actually knows what is going to happen in the US election. And before that, a lot can happen at the international level, and specifically a lot can happen also in Ukraine. So there are discussions specifically on that. I would say more private than public discussions, but there's also a certain degree of waiting to see what exactly is going to happen specifically in the United States before any longer term decisions are made on the support that Ukraine would need in order to defend itself appropriately from Russia.
Okay. Thank you, Thomas. Thomas Sparrow joining us from DW Berlin. On to the other big conflict raging in West Asia. Israel, based on intelligence inputs, has said that Gaza's largest medical facility, the Shifa, was again being used by terrorists. Ollie Barrett is in London. My colleague gives us more on this and other stories making headlines around the world. Ollie, another raid at Shifa.
Yes, Tanvi, that's exactly right. The Israeli military claims that it killed 90 terrorists at Gaza's Al-Shifa hospital and also says it arrested 160 more for questioning. Israel says the raid at Gaza's largest medical facility was based on intelligence that it was again being used, as you were saying, by terrorists. In northern Gaza, an IDF aircraft struck an operational Hamas tunnel shaft. In southern Gaza, security forces say they eliminated 3 terrorists and struck terrorist sites during operations in Khan Yunis. Israeli forces also say they killed 6 terrorists in Jabalia. Well, we can go live now to DD India's Sarah Coates, who's joining me from Tel Aviv. And Sarah, just give us more detail on that latest Al-Shifa raid if you can.
Hello there, Ollie. Well, this began very early Monday morning. As far as we are aware, it is continuing. The military has issued this operational update, calling it a precise and targeted operation, saying that these officers, these troops that are inside this hospital, are doing everything they can to prevent harm to the patients, the doctors, and also the equipment. What we do need to remember is this is the largest medical facility in the Gaza Strip. It has been raided a number of other times. It is now semi-operational after being taken out of action, as were many of these hospitals inside the Gaza Strip. But it's also the place where many displaced people have been sheltering. We do understand some 3,000 internally displaced Palestinians were seeking shelter inside this hospital, and they are detailing absolute chaos. Many of these people say that they were detained for hours. They were then forced to take their clothes off, and before they could leave, they were told to put their clothes back on and then move to safer zones further down in the south. Now, the military says it is acting on intelligence that Hamas operatives were working inside this hospital and may still be in there. But at this stage, Ollie, the military has not provided any credible information that actually backs these claims up. But what it is important to add is that hospitals are protected under international law, especially during times of war, but this is then voided if it is found that it is being used by the enemy to potentially launch an attack. So certainly a very worrying situation at Shifa, just given the sheer number of injuries in the Strip and how little there is to treat these people.
Okay, Sarah. Well, with international concern mounting over long-expected operation into Rafah in Gaza, what are we hearing from Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister?
Well, Netanyahu addressed lawmakers late last night, Ollie, saying that he is determined to go down into that southernmost city of Rafah, saying that he made it supremely clear to the US President Joe Biden during that phone call they had on Monday that this operation would happen, with Israel claiming that this is the last Hamas stronghold, believing that potentially some of these senior Hamas leaders are hiding underneath Rafah, potentially surrounded by a number of these Israeli hostages. He says that we will wait to hear these proposals from the United States on what it's saying could be alternate methods of getting control of these Hamas operatives down in that southern city. And we do need to remember here that Washington has now summoned an Israeli envoy for meetings which are expected to happen very early next week. So this is certainly very worrying, given the amount of pressure that's being put on Israel to pull back from this operation, given the sheer number of people that are actually sheltering down in Rafah, some 1.3 million internally displaced people, with absolutely no plan presented as yet to the United States as to where these people should go, Ollie.
DD India's Sarah Coates in Tel Aviv. Thank you. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has arrived in Saudi Arabia, marking his 6th visit to the Middle East since the Israel-Hamas conflict started. The top diplomat for the United States is scheduled to meet Saudi leaders in Jeddah and Egyptian leaders in Cairo to push for a Gaza ceasefire. Antony Blinken is expected to focus on efforts to deliver more aid into Gaza during talks with those leaders. Discussions on a truce brokered by Egypt and Qatar are set to resume this week in Qatar. Here in the UK, there might be some relief from higher interest rates, which have been raised by the Bank of England because of inflation. Official data from the Office for National Statistics has showed annual inflation fell from 4% in January to 3.4% in February. That is the lowest rate of inflation for the UK since September 2021, and it increases expectations that the Bank of England will be able to reduce interest rates later this year.
As inflation gets closer to its target, that opens the door for the Bank of England to consider bringing down interest rates. That brings down mortgage rates. That makes a very big difference. It's far too early to know whether we'll have another fiscal event before the election. But what I would say is that what you can see is the difficult decisions the government has taken over the last year are paying off.
Tensions in Haiti are escalating amid gang wars that are paralysing the Caribbean nation. On Tuesday, an alleged gang leader who escaped from Port-au-Prince prison had called on his supporters to retake control of the Carrefour neighbourhood, which was lost to an enemy gang after his arrest in June 2022. Ezekiel Alexandra was arrested on allegations of murder, illegal possession of firearms and armed robbery. Haiti, certainly a story to keep an eye on in the coming days. Tanvi, back to you in the studio.
Thank you, Ollie. Ollie Barrett joining us from London. Moving on in DD India Global, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi attended the country's largest and first of its kind startup event called the Startup Mahakumbh 2024 in New Delhi on Wednesday. The Startup Mahakumbh is a forum which brings together stakeholders from the world of startups, innovators and budding entrepreneurs. The event is designed to foster innovation and entrepreneurship. Prime Minister Narendra Modi said that India's startup ecosystem is flourishing at an unprecedented pace.
आज जब देश 2047 के विकसित भारत के रोड मैप पर काम कर रहा है, ऐसे समय मुझे लगता है कि ये स्टार्टअप महाकुंभ का बहुत महत्व है। बीते दशकों में हमने देखा है कि भारत ने कैसे आईटी और सॉफ्टवेयर सेक्टर में अपनी छाप छोड़ी है। अब हम भारत में इनोवेशन और स्टार्टअप कल्चर का ट्रेंड लगातार बढ़ता हुआ देख रहे हैं।
Prime Minister Narendra Modi visited an exhibition at the Startup Mahakumbh at Bharat Mandapam in New Delhi. The event designed to foster innovation and entrepreneurship across India witnessed an unparalleled level of participation from leading investors, innovators and aspiring entrepreneurs. The event has witnessed vibrant discussions on way forward and networking between all stakeholders. More from India. The 44-day-long electoral process begins on Wednesday with the Election Commission of India issuing the notification for the first phase of general elections. Voting for 102 Lok Sabha constituencies across 17 states and 4 union territories will take place on 19th of April. The last date for filing nominations is 27th of March. The 2024 election will be conducted in 7 phases, with the final phase scheduled for 1st of June. Counting of votes will take place on the 4th of June. Meta, the parent company of Facebook, has decided to limit misinformation in the view of parliamentary elections in India. The company is working on removing voter interference and enhance transparency and accountability across its platforms to support a free and fair election. Meta said that 40,000 people are working globally on safety and security, with more than $20 billion invested in teams and technology in this area since 2016. 15,000 content reviewers are put on duty to review content across Facebook, Instagram and Threads in more than 70 languages, including 20 Indian languages. The company said that it is applying the methods developed during the course of lessons learnt in hundreds of elections globally. On to Africa now. Unrest in Sudan continues as unidentified youth in Pibor region shot dead 15 people on Tuesday. According to an official, the region's commissioner was also killed in the latest flare-up of the violence in the country. Authorities said that the suspect belonged to the region's Anuyak community. Since the 2018 peace deal, routine clashes among a patchwork of armed groups have continued to kill and displace large number of civilians. The Greater Pibor administrative area is among those affected. And next we take a look at what else is happening across the world. Troops from the United States and South Korea engaged in a joint military exercise on Wednesday, days after Pyongyang fired multiple rockets. 470 soldiers from both the sides, as well as 65 pieces of military equipment from the US Army, participated in the joint drill. Archaeologists in southeast Turkey uncovered new findings on piercings and identity in BC-era Fertile Crescent. They found compelling evidence that 11,000-year-old beads excavated near skeletons are, in fact, piercings used by people of the time. The Attica Zoological Park in Greece welcomed a rare and endangered pygmy hippopotamus. For the first time in 10 years, pygmy hippos are native to swamps and rainforests in Western Africa. The International Olympic Committee has banned the participation of Russian athletes from the opening ceremony of the Paris 2024 Olympics in July. Condemning the decision, Russian Foreign Ministry has called it unjust and unacceptable. Earlier, same restrictions were imposed on Russia's neighboring country, Belarus, as it acted as an ally to Moscow in the ongoing conflict with Ukraine.
The IOC's decisions are illegitimate, unjust and unacceptable. We are outraged by the unprecedented discriminatory conditions imposed by the International Olympic Committee on the Russian athletes who compete in an individual so-called neutral status, who are essentially forced to renounce any association with their homeland, their citizenship, their history, culture and their people.
A bit more on culture. Spain's Valencia Fallas Festival wrapped up with fireworks and burning of intricate, vibrant sculptures on Tuesday. The annual tradition marks the change of seasons with a 5-day fiesta of street dancing and fireworks commemorating Saint Joseph, the patron saint of carpenters. Take a look. So that's all in this edition of DD India Global. Join us for another edition of the show at 7:30 p.m. IST for next edition with Washington. You can connect with us on Facebook, X, formerly Twitter and Instagram at DD India Live. You can also find us online at ddindia.co.in. We will be back with more news as it breaks here on DD India. I'm Tanvi Taneja from my entire team in New Delhi. Thank you for watching. Namaskar.